Hello and welcome to What Would Jesus Tech? We are a podcast where we're trying to figure out how to use technology in order to glorify God. We can do that. We can use technology, and there's all kinds of technologies, and we've done food technology, we've done social media, and today we're going to talk about something different, something that some of you use. If you use a notes app, then you've used this. A personal knowledge management system, you might call it PKM for short. Sometimes we might call it PKM. Sometimes people talk about Evernote as like, oh, that's a step up from just using a note app or a sticky note on your wall. And some of us, like myself and Luke Miller, who's with me today, have progressed into using something called Rome Research. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But first, let's just get to know Luke. Luke, you used to be in pastoral ministry, then you left in order to join a startup. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your story?
Sure. Yeah, I grew up in a pastor's home, actually. So we moved here to the Central Valley in California when I was very young, 5 years old. And my dad's been a pastor here ever since 1990. So been in the same church with my family. We joke with our kids. Our kids run through halls that I ran through when I was, 5, 6, 7 years old. Same building, many of the same people who have faithfully been there for years. So that was my background growing up. And then once I graduated from college, I came back and I served as a teaching pastor here at our church for about 5 years. And then around that time, we were, going through some changes in our family and in our church and praying through some transitions. And God provided an opportunity for me to join an old friend who was starting a startup that would be a dev agency. So we essentially have a team of developers in Uruguay, actually, who work with us and our clients to build products. And so I've been doing that for the last 2.5 years, actually. I'll be traveling to Uruguay in 2024 for the first time to meet the team that I've been working with for 2.5 years. It's just the nature of digital work in this era is that we've been on Zoom calls for hours and hours over 2 years, and I'll be meeting them for the first time this next year. So that's kind of been the transition for the family side. We have 3 kids, my wife and I do. So we have a 11-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 7-year-old, which keep us busy around the house.
Of course. This is my first summer trying to figure out, there's no childcare provided. What am I going to do? And so even scheduling this, and we had to do some rescheduling, and we won't talk about the audio that is gone forever due to technical difficulties. But the summer's the busyness with kids, but you hear a lot of stories, or at least I have perhaps from pastors who describe themselves as leaving the tech world into the church world. And that's part of my story in some ways as well. But it's cool to hear the story go the other way, that there could be pastors who are like, hey, they see a vision, they see a way of serving, and it's not like one type of vocation is better than the other. Do you struggle with that? Or do you feel like you just, your theology, it's okay to be a pastor or a dev shop, manager or whatever?
Yeah, there are things obviously about both sides of it that I have enjoyed and things that I miss from pastoral ministry, of course. I think one thing that has helped us as we transition between different places in life and seasons is that our involvement in the church really hasn't changed a whole lot on a very practical level when it comes to our kids and our family being engaged in worship and community in our church. And those things feel so much the same that even though there was a vocation change for me, I don't think that there was much of a change in terms of our family's relationship with the church. So there are little things my kids will notice. Hey, you're not doing this anymore, or we don't see you in this context anymore. But so probably that's the main thing. And if that change, vocational change, also includes changes on a personal level or family level, then obviously you're dealing with a problem that goes deeper than just a job change. So that's probably been the biggest help for us.
Cool. No, that's a cool model. I really respect even the fact that you were able to stay in the same church and the same family life and that sort of thing, because some pastors, it's like an ego thing, or it's the sense of wanting to be in control. And it's like, what are you doing? Like, you're a shepherd when you're a pastor, and now there's a shepherd of you when you're, a parishioner, or whatever word you want to use. So that's really cool. When in your journey, because Rome Research has only been out, it's not that old of a product. Yeah. So was it in the middle of pastoring that you discovered this tool?
No, that would have been just after. So probably starting tools like note taking or writing tools. If you're a pastor teaching every week, as I was, you're writing 6,000 to 8,000 words a week, every week. And at least I was, because I generally would manuscript most of it. And so very early on, I was trying to find resources for how do I do this? I'm reading a lot of things. How do I piece them together? Obviously, you have word processors that will handle the writing of the sermon at the end. I don't think I ever used anything fancy for that. But when it came to collecting the information that you were going to use, that was a little more complicated. And so I early on started looking for options that might help. I used Evernote for many, many years. You mentioned Evernote at the beginning. That's probably the most common tool that people know about. I used that for probably 7, 8 years. And then I started realizing some limitations, which we can talk about, probably will reveal why I like Rome a lot more. But at the time, I was just feeling this friction with my work and writing. So I started looking for other things, and I probably tried 6 or 7 other things. Devon Think, Joplin. I tried Standard Notes. I tried a few other tools, and it was a little probably 6 months to a year of bouncing around, and then I eventually ended back at Evernote. They just weren't worth the switching cost to try to figure out this new thing and move everything over. And it was right around that time that my brother-in-law let me know about Rome. So that was after I had started working in tech. I was still reading a lot, so a lot of the same workflows were still there, but it was a different context for me. Less writing and more focused on learning. And for me, I was learning a brand new industry. I didn't know anything about product management, didn't know much about all the ins and outs. And I'm not an engineer, so I'm not working in development like our team is, but I do have to understand what we're doing and the big picture of what we're doing. So it was a big learning season for me. So that helped me process those things I was learning and keep everything straight.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes sense. And it's helpful context too to think about who is the audience here. Like, is Rome Research just for pastors? No, they made this product, industry neutral. It's really a product that can be used by developers. It's a product that could be used, for any knowledge workers who you're trying to organize your thoughts. Some people use it for more of a productivity system, but it's very neutral, and we'll get into it. We'll transition. Maybe you can start sharing your screen. But what we will do is we will end the audio recording for the podcast people here. So if you're listening on Apple and you're like, wait a second, this is a short podcast for WWJT. Well, it's because it doesn't make sense to just give you the audio while we're showing you an actual product. So you head over to our YouTube account, What Would Jesus Tech on YouTube, and we'll continue the conversation there. But this is something that's pretty much for anyone who's interested in organizing their thoughts. Some people call it a second brain. There's other conceptual ways of thinking about this. It's ways of, you want to store things in a memory bank somehow, and you want to retrieve it easily. So you need a software to support you. And perhaps that's what something like Rome Research could do. I would say for my parents who often listen to this podcast because they love me and I appreciate that they still listen to it, they probably don't need Rome Research. But for most, because they're just not in that phase of life, they're retired. They read books and write in the book itself and make notes in it. And interact in that way. But for someone like James Kelly, the CEO of Faith Tech, I could see him, he loves to write notes in books, and that's great. Keep doing that. But then instead of just having that book on your shelf, maybe you capture your core highlights from that book into something so that when you're doing sermon prep, that and we'll get into it. It's the retrieval later so that there's not a few dozen books on your shelf. And what about 10 years from now when you forgot? That sort of thing. So Rome Research, we are looking at your screen right now. We're looking at August 18th, 2023. Walk us through what we're seeing here on your screen.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about who might use it. So there is kind of there's two main categories of people who use Rome, and I'm more in the second category, but both of them are used widely. The first one would be really focused on this page we're looking at right here, which is the daily notes page. So every day, a note is created for that day automatically when you open the product. So if you open it up on a web app or whatever you're using, it will pull up that day and it will allow you to type. And many people use it primarily from that context. They will do journaling for that day. And this would be true for anybody, right? I mean, you mentioned knowledge workers, which is more in the second category I'll talk about, but even people who are, parents and busy who just want to keep track of what's going on in their life, and they want to be able to look back 10 years from now and remember, the conversations they had with their kids. We'll do this, and I do this in Rome, where I'm driving to church one day and I'll have a conversation with our 7-year-old that just strikes me as funny or insightful, and you just jot down the conversation, tag the person's name, and then over time you can collect those things. And on her wedding day one day, I'll pull it out and embarrass her, right? That's how it works. You get to save stuff to embarrass your kids later. But yeah, so journaling would be a huge part of that. And there's a lot of people who use it for that kind of thing, including the productivity side that you mentioned, right? Tracking their tasks and maybe doing a captain's log or a interstitial journaling where they're keeping track of what they're doing during their workday. And that's a lot of that's done here from the daily notes page. But the important thing to note here, just as we're thinking about Rome, is that this is really just a page. They have a dedicated place to get to these daily notes, but they're really just a page. And everything in Rome kind of falls under that same basic idea. The big framework change, if you want to think about other note-taking tools compared to Rome, the thing that I always tell people is, in Evernote, the metaphor that they're essentially using is folders and files. So you create all these folders, and then you drop these files into them: pictures, notes, images. And I did this for many years, as I mentioned, when I was teaching at our church. I would read a book, and you come out of that reading with 300 or 400 highlights from what you read, maybe less, maybe more, and then you drop all of those. I was really proud. Oh, these are great. Obviously, I wanted to keep them because I highlighted them. I would copy them into a note in Evernote, title it after the book, and then I would never see it again, or at least never see very much of it again. And I realized over time their big problem with this is all of the tagging options in Evernote are at a note level, which is that whole note of 300 highlights. I can tag the whole note, which works if you're trying to find the book, but it doesn't really help you with, paragraph number 86 that's down on the list that was specific for something that you were studying. There's no way to retrieve that, as you mentioned. There's no way for that to resurface at any point in the future without going through the notes one at a time, line by line, to find what you had read. So that old model of folders and then files that could put into there really is restrictive for anything beyond like a folder that's titled after a project, a specific project that you're working on. So if you have a folder that you're working on a specific project, and then as you read and do life, you find stuff that's relevant and you drop it in there, that could be very useful. Over time, you'll have stuff that you've collected. But if you're reading a book where the applications of that book or the relevance for that book are split between many different areas of your life, then it's not going to work very well. And so what Rome does instead of that is, in Rome, every one of these little bullet points in Rome is really considered, you should really think of it as a note in and of itself. So there are pages, which are just collections of notes, which are blocks. So you could have a note here, you could have notes that you add together, and every one of these are individual notes, which means that you can click on it and you could see it by itself, focused in on that note, and type whatever you want to here. And then after you wrote information here and you go back to your main page, you're going to see that expanded. And those notes, then once you think about bullet points as notes and then pages as collections, you realize now that you can reference specific notes on a very long page and use them in many contexts. And I'll show you what that looks like for like book notes in a second.
Sure.
But one thing to keep in mind as well is that if you're going to create a page in Rome, one other really nice thing is that you can do that with double brackets really easily. So if I want to create a page, all I have to do is use double brackets. It creates the page, you hit enter. And now if I click on this test page, it's going to have the page I just created instantly. And this is another huge benefit over most note tools. In Evernote, that process is a little bit longer. I mean, it's not too much longer, but if you do it multiple times a day or multiple times a week, it adds up. And it's just very easy to create a page and link to that page. You can also see in the references here that it shows me where this page is used. You can see that it's referenced here on August 18th, which was the page we just came from. So these links, the references here, which you'll see a lot more of as we look at real pages, is another useful thing that's built into Rome.
Yeah, I'll just jump in and say, like, my literally a week ago, I decided, all right, for this youth retreat that I'm going to be speaking at in a week and a half,
Yeah.
I am going to do Psalm 19. I've just been going through different Psalms and I decided that's going to be a good one. I'll kick off the youth retreat going through Psalm 19. And so I started my Rome research note with the title of the sermon, double brackets. And then I was like, oh yeah. And then I should, related to this is going to be Psalm 19. So I do that. And then I realized I had already created a Psalm 19 note. I click and then I find out this is C.S. Lewis's favorite Psalm.
Yes.
I had no idea, but apparently I was smart enough years ago, or I guess it was a year or two ago, when I was going through C.S. Lewis's little book on C.S. Lewis on the Psalms or whatever it's called. I don't even know what it's called. Like my memory sucks, right? But as I'm going through, I see, not only do I see that it's his favorite Psalm, but why it's his favorite Psalm. I see his commentary that I highlighted and wrote down before, connecting the first section to the second section of the Psalm. And I'm like, this is perfect. I have now a 3 to 5 minute chunk of my message that's pretty much done for me because of that past creating of a Psalm 19 page. And then simply by double bracketing again, and with those double brackets, it's you can see it on your screen right now. It's a link. It's highlighted in blue because it's a hyperlink, and that's kind of the power of what we're talking about.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you're right, the compounding benefit of doing that, little things that you do as you read, or as you have, your personal time, devotion time in the morning, as you're writing out, over time, those little pieces of writing that you do don't seem like a lot, but when you get to the point where you're preparing a lesson like you were, a sermon, they all come together, and now you have so many tools available to you. Interesting thing about that chapter that you're talking about, and I'm kind of going out of order here, but it just was relevant because you mentioned preparing for a message that you were doing in Psalm 19. In Rome Public, which I have pulled up here, Rome Public is a website that's dedicated to providing databases that are books or other texts that you can import into Rome. They have the Bible. It's only the King James because it's obviously copyright issues. But once I've imported all of this into Rome just so that I have it available to me. One really interesting thing, if you're adding stuff, and let's say that you forgot to link it because you actually had the foresight to say, I think I want to need this in the future for Psalm 19. Right. Here's what's really interesting is you don't even have to do that. If you didn't link it at all, you could look at unlinked references and you can see all the places where Psalm 119 was referenced. And I don't do this for every chapter because it would take too long, but you could, with one click, you could link all of these. Where if you know there's Psalm 119 and you know they're relevant, you can start adding these to your list of linked references and find throughout your database where Psalm 19 is mentioned.
And so these are all your past notes. Like we're looking at, so you read A Peculiar Glory by John Piper, and he had something there on Psalm 19. You wrote that down in Rome Research, but you didn't tag it, but now we're able to see it in this unlinked references. Exactly. And when you click linked, that's bringing it into linked. So now it has that hyperlink. Right. But even if you don't hyperlink, Rome Research is smart enough to pick up on that. As long as you wrote it exactly that way of Psalm, the whole word Psalm and 19.
Exactly. And that's what I was just going to mention. There are issues where maybe somebody does this slightly differently, right? Where in, let's say that they do their references this way, and you're going to find this as well. A couple examples came up here. So you can kind of have your normal, the way, if you're doing research for a specific chapter, you might dig in a little bit more on a specific formatting thing, but it's not too excessive. Like that doesn't take that long, and you can pull together some resources that you've already gathered. But the example you gave is really helpful, and I think something that will happen more and more as you're working with the notes in Rome. This still happens. I'm just so
weekly. Impressed that you have so many notes on Psalm 19. I'm like, wow, like you. This is why I brought you on the podcast, is because you clearly, by your Twitter use and stuff, and that's where I met you, is you leverage Rome Research in its full power. And it's like, the more you take notes, the more you're going to have to draw on later. And it takes more time, but I appreciate just even having this conversation to motivate myself to keep documenting the things that I like, because my future self will appreciate it.
Well, and just really, really focus on, I really think it's important to focus on the fact that many days, I mean, I have, as I mentioned, 3 kids. They might be knocking on this door in a few minutes. Many days are busy where all I'm really having is I have a few minutes in the morning or the evening where I'm reading through notes, and I take 5 minutes to type down in my own words something from that I read that day. And that is literally the output for the day, if you want to think of it that way. And so don't think you have to sit down and spend an hour there, typing out and connecting. And, you may have time sometimes to do more, but those little things that you do each day and whatever you're trying to learn, when I was learning, product management before coming on at this tech company and thinking through the different stages of building a product, I was reading a lot of books, and that's what I was really focused on. It was my job that I had to learn and understand, and I was taking notes every day on what I was learning. And so whatever you're doing and however you're applying it, just thinking about it as little investments each day, they will add up over time. The reality is, and I hate to say this because it kind of undermines the tool itself, but the reality is the steps of thinking through what you're reading or learning and then writing it in your own words would be valuable even if they self-destructed 5 days later. Like, that's the reality.
Right.
Is
Right.
It's already a benefit, but even better if you have a tool that will help you, resurface those things and connect them later.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point, because I think that's what, like, How to Take Smart Notes is kind of a book that seemed to inspire Rome research, and it talks about the importance of that. And, if you think about Bloom's taxonomy, you think about how Bloom's taxonomy, if you just Google it, it's like how educators think about learning, and the higher levels of learning and actually capturing that and demonstrating learning is through creation. So you want to have that kind of thing. So anyways,
I think I have it. Yeah, I was looking at this the other day. I think I have. Yeah, this is the one.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
and that's a good example of, you can have other things other than text within Rome.
Yes.
If you copy a YouTube link, then it'll go there. We don't have to go into all the use cases, but it is powerful in the way that it does that. And I was actually looking this up the other day because I'm like, ooh, I do want to add a bunch of PDFs. Should I add that to Rome, or should I keep it in Google Drive? But when you add the PDF into Rome, it saves it as a hyperlink to another website. So it doesn't slow down your Rome graph very much by adding a picture or a PDF to Rome. So that's helpful context. Obviously, if you're looking at all of it on one page, then that will impact it.
I will typically do that. I will typically add it. I haven't noticed it slowing down too much, but then I also usually will have my own notes eventually underneath. After I've read it, I will have like a separate section where I copy out notes that I've read. It might be useful to look at, let's look at an example of a book. This is a great... There's a Rome Depot here, which is built into Rome, and a bunch of extensions that you can add. This was a recent
like an app
one.
store, so to speak.
Yes.
If you're using an iPhone, you have an app store to add additional features to your iPhone. Rome has a Rome Depot. Yeah,
definitely. There's one recently that was added where you can set a specific tag to convert to an icon, which is what you're seeing with the little book icons there. Just a lot of little things like that, just to kind of improve the visual look of a page. It helps me track whether I've already gone through the highlights on that book or whether I'm still working through it. This is one we'll use as an example. So this would be Abolition of Man is a book I've read a few different times. And typically I'll have when I read a book and have my highlights from the book that I've read after I've finished, I'll typically use a template to set up a page to start copying over what I've learned and what I've pulled from that book. The template feature we haven't talked about, but it's so useful. It's built into the Rome. It doesn't need to be an extension. It's a built-in feature. If you hit semicolon twice, it will pull up all of the templates that you've added. And a template is really any block at all that you attach at the end, Rome/template. That link, that page, that link at the end of that block. Anything underneath then becomes a template. So the one I was going to talk about now was this source one. Let me show you what it looks like on a page. If I were to do a new source template, it would pull in automatically all of the text that I've added for that template and add it to that page. Now, most of it's blank initially. Obviously, you haven't done anything yet with it. But in the case of Abolition of Man, I already copied that over, and I started working through the information on that book. I'll tag it with specific subjects or keywords. Actually, when I usually add a book for the first time, I don't do any of this stuff. It's all blank except for my highlights. I just drop my highlights in, and I usually come back in multiple passes later and start to process that over time. It's partly due to what you talked about earlier. The pressure of having some kind of perfect system is really not useful. So it's better just to take it in stages and just think to yourself, I'll be back to this later. When I come back to it later, I'll improve it next time that I'm here, and I'll add more context. And so this has been one that I've been working on for probably 3 years. I've probably come back to this a few dozen times over the last 3 years and added information as I read. Just recently, I saw there was a new book out by Michael Ward called After Humanity, which I want to read. And it's specifically on C.S. Lewis's Abolition of Man. So I'm really excited about reading that and kind of adding to what I already have here. But you can see there's key ideas that I've collected. And then you get down to this point here. And this would be where I have the highlights from the book itself, having read it. And I copy them in directly. And you can see basic formatting things here. Most people will be familiar with this. You have highlighting, bolding. You can do quote if you want to highlight a quote in a specific way. The thing that's interesting about Rome, though, is along with having all that stuff here and being able to annotate it, highlight it, the things here that you can see visually, is you can, underneath of a block, you can add your own ideas, your own commentary, your own wording there to put it in your own words. And later on, if you come back to this in any way, because it's linked somewhere else, it will reveal the original context that you wrote those notes in. So let me find actually a good example here, and I'll show what this looks like, because this is really nice. In the past, I would have had to create a separate note for this and then link back to another page. But because you can indent information underneath, it allows you to see this very easily. Let me find a good example.
Yeah. Because we just, earlier in the video, we went over the power of pages and collections and thinking about pages as collections of notes, and each bullet point is a note that you could just focus on that one bullet point, so to speak, and that paragraph, if you will. And so each paragraph is its own thing. But then this indenting allows you, every time you indent, it's tied together. You don't just indent to create something new. There's a connection.
Yeah, you have a parent and you have a child, and that relationship is maintained throughout the entire graph, wherever you see it. So if I click on this link here that was indented underneath, you can see in the linked references, it shows the link itself, but it also shows the context. By clicking right here, I can see what was the paragraph that was leading me to write that or to capture that information. And this is obviously just a term that I collected from C.S. Lewis, which is great. But there are a lot of other your own writing. This is my own writing here, right? With a claim that I was working through. So if I'm thinking through this claim later and I find it somewhere, then those ideas are automatically in the context of the original person that wrote it. So think about if you're teaching and you're reading a commentary and you copied over highlights from a commentary. You're not going to use those word for word in your sermon, but indented underneath, you paraphrase that and reuse that in a way that is in your own words that captures maybe a central idea that's there. And then you use that later on in writing a sermon. You can have that context automatically shown where it came from. It's really, if you're doing formal papers, obviously you have to cite, and all those things would be more relevant. But in this context, what's most important for personal use is that I know where I got that from. Because sometimes you'll write something and you'll think, that sounds off. Like, I don't even think that sounds like it's true. Why was I thinking that? And being able to find where the context was that you originally had that insight will either tell you you're wrong or confirm, yeah, I misinterpreted that. That was not what it said. And it lets you do that work later if you want to.
And that's why I think some people do like using the daily notes. And I've even done this where I kind of, my thinking develops over time, like my ecclesiology, my doctrine of the church, and what you have to include in order to be a church has developed significantly and changed over the last 15 years. And I do find it helpful to kind of see that, remind myself of that trajectory. And so I will include dates in that kind of context. And, I'm adding this additional thought. Like this is all focused on the book, claim, counterclaim, those sorts of things. And you might think of a new argument and you could just add, that's another small little feature that you could simply show on the screen right now is when you hit /, whenever you're typing, you start to hit /, then all of a sudden you see these different things. So to do, it creates a little to-do list. And then if you hit today, so I do / today, it'll add today's date. So there's just little things like that are nice little quality of life things that if you want to be typing quickly, then you can take advantage of some of these small things. But I just took us on a random tangent there. But
no, it's good. Yeah,
maybe
you're right. People use the daily notes page all the time for what you described. Like that book, you might be listening to a podcast and someone, Andrew mentioned abolition of man today on his podcast. And you might have notes about what you said about it, right? And you might have the notes. And then when I go later on back to my abolition of man page where I have my notes, what I'll have, as well as all of my ideas that I've already collected, is I'll also have in the linked references, I'll have August 18th showing that was referenced in a podcast. Yep. And I can go back there if I want to. So there are multiple ways for you to connect information without feeling like you have to drop all of it on the main page every time. Even that whole linking thing we talked about earlier, think about how useful that is, because let's say that there are 500 references to Psalm 19 in my notes. I don't have that many, but let's say there were. It's unlikely that I'm going to want 500 of them linked as being prime linked references. Right. Probably I'm going to want to unlink some of those and drop them down to that unlinked section where they're not in the way and they're not cluttering up my page. So that's that ability to kind of move things outside of your central vision, not on the page, but in references, and not in linked references, but in unlinked references. It lets you manage a lot of information without feeling overwhelmed by it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, having a hierarchy to what you care about. I've often felt that I will be tagging something, whatever the tag is, Doctrine of God X or whatever, and so I'm adding a random thought because I'm reading C.S. Lewis. He makes a note on it. I add it there. And then I go to the Doctrine of God page and I'm like, oh, it's blank. But I won't fill it up unless I really care to fill it up. Like it's like that, to add data to that page is like a step in almost writing an essay or a small paper for a class in seminary. It's like, I'm going to give that a higher quality barrier compared to something in daily notes where I'm okay with more journal-esque type notes. And that's how I've done it. Again, you could do it different way. You could have within this page of Abolition of Man, you could have a section on reflections. Like you've created it this way with your, formatting and style, and it follows your personality of more organized and detailed and that sort of thing. And I sometimes just have a section on a page like this of reflections, and the writing is not ideal. It's not, grammar's not good. It's all over the place, but it's just getting my thoughts out as quick as I can. And then coming back to it later. Sometimes it has the benefit of seeing those reflections, but sometimes it has a negative aspect too. But there's different ways you can use it.
That point, Andrew, is actually really, really good. That when I first started Rome, so this is back in 2019 or 2020, when I first started using it, I created pages for everything, every little thing from Evernote. And it is, I mean, you can say it's preference, and maybe there are some people who would do it and it's fine, but I would strongly recommend not doing that. Because every bullet point is a note, you don't want to create a separate page for all these things, because it spreads them out in a way that you can't view them together. You can't see them easily together. And if they're already related in a context, you want to keep that context. So to your point, like on a bibliography page like this, there are times where I'll have just this. I'll have just this bullet point with some ideas that I copied in. I don't have a page yet. There's no page with the source template, no notes yet. I haven't even read the book yet. Or in this case I have, but I haven't put my highlights in here. But it's just here as a bullet point entry. And then down the road, if I want to create a page out of this, all I have to do is select this, like we talked about earlier, double bracket. I create my page. I would literally copy this information over, in my case, because there's no links or anything to be lost. And then I would add it here with the template. So as you develop your ideas and as you get ready to start diving in deeper, you can move everything over to a page. But initially, I would recommend not doing that with everything on your page, because it will very quickly make you feel disconnected from what you have. Their pages, like this page here, these three larger pages, were all, I think it was around 80,000 words, and they were all on one page, and it was starting to slow down the page. So I split them. And that's probably a good rule of thumb. If you start to feel like things are loading too slowly or too much information to process on a certain page, then you can break it up into separate pages, and that will work over time. So yeah, I like that a lot as a way of saving some time and lowering, I think, the pressure that you have to start something, because that's often the barrier is I don't think I'm ready to create a page for this book yet because I don't have time to
Right.
make it look pretty. I don't have time to make, to put everything in order. Well, don't worry about it. Just literally create the page or create a bullet and just put your ideas down, your few thoughts
Yeah.
that you have. Later on, you can come back and do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It
Yep.
it always like in the How to Take Smart Notes book, they talk about, those steps, right? And going through those steps. And obviously
Yeah.
there's the ideal, and then there's the reality of I'm listening
Yeah.
to a podcast or an audiobook in the car. I'm going to pull over, make a quick note, or use my audio feature to create a
Yep.
note and then send it in. And then hopefully later I'll take the time to format it better. And
Yeah.
whenever I revisit it, right? One thing I wanted to call to attention is that we've been using the shortcuts feature on the left-hand side. So your shortcuts feature has all of these pages that you've created that kind of act like a file folder system for you in the way that you've created it, right?
Yeah.
So you have this lexicon, you have bibliography, you have all those kinds of things. And I think all of us users of Rome have different things that we call to that shortcut area. So I have like a message prep section that then if there's any messages that I'm prepping, then they're all tagged within that section and then they're linked. And then I just go from there. It's just a quick way to click.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, there we go. Instead of searching in the search bar, or
And
any
that's
books
easy
that
to
I'm
do.
reading, things like that.
Yep, just from the top right here, you can add it to shortcuts just from the menu, and everyone does it differently. A really good way to think about those links on the side is to think of them as entry points into your notes. So as opposed to just they're not just folders because they're all hyperlinked and connected to everything else. Once you get into them, they're really entry points, and those entry points might change over time. You might be working on a project that you need to get to every day, and you can put it in the sidebar. And then you stop working on it or it's finished and you take it off. But thinking of it as like an index of entrances into your notes and thinking of what are the different ways that I like to get into my notes or that I need to get into them. And then putting that for easy reference. One thing, I'll give an example. So I added this one more recently. This Book of Centuries is an idea that I think comes from classical education. It's more for students. But the idea is that you create a timeline of history they recommend doing centuries. Toward the end I actually end up down to decades because it's easier, but being able to create an outline of history and then be able to bullet point things that are happening in different periods of time. I did this recently because I found that I was very, very familiar with biblical history, which is all the ones that are blue. So the blue highlighted ones are all things that are tied directly to biblical history. But then I was very, very oblivious to where biblical history started to overlap with other histories, Greek history or other history, even later on. Like I just was very not aware of those overlaps, and so I wanted a way to put those in one place. And a good example of this is whenever I finish a book that I really like. I think I have C.S. Lewis's on here. I think I did it recently. I don't add this right away, but over time, if I find Mere Christianity. So I'll add Mere Christianity published in 1952. It's really interesting to see like what else is going on when this book was published, right? What else was happening around this time when this person started thinking about these things or finished writing about these things, connecting different types of events. If there's, of course, if I'm ever doing something in biblical history now, often I'll go back and look at that century and look at what other things were happening at that time. It just gives you some context, some additional context for what you're learning. So this has been fun. I also do this with our kids where we'll take a century or a decade and we'll look at fun things that happened that year. And then based on their recommendation, I'll add certain things to the list that are kind of a fun snapshot of that period of time. So if you go here to, let's find actually the Apostle Paul, because this is a good example of how useful this might be. Oh, which one did I use? We have two here. Oh, wrong one.
The classic double note creation.
Yeah, exactly. I got to fix that later.
Yeah.
So
and there is a way to merge two notes together, but we won't get into that now.
Yeah, there is. So you can see here the Book of Centuries is coming up because I've linked Paul in multiple places. And what you actually get is a little bit of a timeline from the Bible on what happens or what's happened in Paul's ministry and Paul's life over time, with references to books of the Bible where that was coming from, And so later on, I don't have much here now, but later on, as I start to work through on this page more, I always have in ready access to a timeline for his life at the bottom that I don't have to recreate, on this page and to have a duplicate of.
Yeah, it's that. Yeah, I like how you said it's not a file folder. It's entry points into the graph, and because so much is copied automatically, you could say, within Rome. So you're looking at one page, and you can actually copy like a section of text and say, instead of just copy and paste, how we normally think of copy and paste, Control C or Command C, Command V, but you could in Rome say copy whatever is in this block reference, and then paste that somewhere else. And then anytime you edit that block reference, that particular paragraph, it will be replicated anywhere else, like Wikipedia. And it's just like we're thinking about pages, we're thinking about paragraphs, we're thinking about, these different levels. Well, it's about not duplicating your work. You don't need to write a commentary on Psalm 19 every 10 years when you might be preaching or doing a devotional on Psalm 19. Like, you can leverage your exegetical work from earlier in ministry. Tim Keller, referenced that one of the reasons why he was able to write so many books in his later years was because he'd already done the work early on. Like, he'd been preaching and writing for years and years. And even some of his sermons in the 2000s, he'd say, I preached a similar sermon back in 1992. Right? What he was doing was saving his past work, finding a way to catalog it in some way that he could reference it later. And pastors need to be able to do this. It just makes sense to me to leverage the work that you put into it, because we are in a culture that is no longer high memory capacity. We live in a culture where we're used to writing things down, to remember things. Our memories aren't skilled enough to remember all the things we have to. So we might as well write it down.
And those ideas, even good ideas, require fine tuning. I mean, how many times I've used the theological triage so many times. I think it was originally Albert Mohler. Others have talked about it. And I'm not sure. Are you familiar with the theological triage? Okay, yeah.
Yep.
So I've used that many times.
Super important.
But there's been so many fine tuning things or objections that people will bring up. So if you're a pastor and you have an idea for a sermon and you preach it, very likely at some point, a great idea that you had in a sermon will be challenged by someone in a way that's really thoughtful, and you will need to update your thinking on that. Well, your sermon notes are static at that point. If you just go with printed ones, that never gets changed. But if you have something like Rome where you have the notes that are there, you can go there and actually write out. And I've done this with the theological triage in a couple really important ways, just updating, oh, wow, this is important. When I mention this, I need to make sure that I'm clear that it's, for example, it's possible to have a box 3 doctrine that's not, most important. But if it's tied to script biblical authority, then it is actually box 1, even though the issue itself is not that big a deal. If it's being missed because it's a failure to accept the authority of scriptures, well, now we're back in box 1 again, even though the issue itself is not. And those little kind of refinements over time can happen in a place where you can keep those notes updated.
No, that's really good. I guess
we actually haven't talked about block references. I want to look at that really quick because haven't even done this yet, and really important. So along with referencing pages, which would be like a typical hyperlink, if you've ever seen a hyperlink on Wikipedia or pretty much anywhere, if you link to something, that's what we've already looked at. But in addition to that, you can also reference specific blocks. And remember, we've already basically said that blocks are notes in Rome. So you could reference specific smaller notes, paragraphs, sentences, even words, and reference those without having to reference the entire page. So I've done this already. You see these little numbers next to this. These are all like a glossary of terms that I kind of keep coming back to in different ways. And you can see the little number here.
Which is super cool. When we talked before, I was like blown away by this. I love this idea. And I'm starting to implement it myself, of a glossary of phrases, like the Inner Ring, C.S. Lewis. I have used that so much since I read that in the book or in his one lecture. And so it's like, I want to keep, that's a core concept that you can't just say the inner ring. There's something behind it, or chronological snobbery. There's something behind it. Anyways, you go.
Yeah, no, it's great. Yeah. They call them concept handles because they let you kind of, it's almost like if you want to use technical terms, it's like an API call to your brain that pulls back a lot of extra information beyond just the bare meaning of those words. And so good concept handles that are customized for you, that you've really found and resonated with you, been useful for you, can be very helpful if
like
they're reused.
Theological triage, we just use that.
Yes.
And you're like, do you know that one? I'm like, yeah, I know that one. And we're both pulling the API and we're like, okay, this Gavin Ortland, this historical, this, we're able to go fast that way. Anyways.
Yep,
keep going.
Absolutely. Yeah. So this is an example of that with chronological snobbery. And so these references are, and it's a little bit of a unique UI. Probably you're not familiar with this if you haven't seen Rome. So just let me explain what you're seeing here. You're seeing a bunch of pages listed. These top levels are all pages that have this specific block referenced here. You can see it's underlined. If I click into this, you're going to see it has this weird set of numbers with parentheses. That's a specific reference to this block on the glossary page. And when I do that, it ties back to this block in a way that lets me find all of the references that I've ever made to this idea in my notes. And so that's very useful, for example, if you're doing scripture references. I think we talked about this last time, but there's always a little bit of uncertainty as how you're going to reference scriptures. One thing that I've come to that seems to be the most useful for where I'm doing it right now is I will use the page reference as the first part of the scripture, and then I'll use the block reference for the verse. So what that does in the original context, let me open this in the side. What this does in the original context is if I go to John 3, and then, where were we? John 3:18, and I go to verse 18, what I'll see is here, this reference will point me back to where I referenced that verse. And then if I go to the bottom, I'm also going to see John 3 here, which is tied to the link that I use. So I actually get both references with the formatting of that scripture reference itself. And that's if you're doing commentary work or reading through commentaries or tying together, as you mentioned earlier from Psalm 19, if you're trying to scour all of your highlights to find where people referenced it, that can be very useful to have that option. But the block level references, as far as I know, before Rome, I never heard anything even approaching the ability to do that. I mean, you could even, like, I'm trying to think of an example. If you do double parentheses right here, and I type any word that I want to, joy, sanctification, it will go through all of the blocks in my entire graph and point out the blocks that reference that. Now, a single word search is probably not going to be very useful because you're going to return hundreds, thousands of them. But let's say you're like, man, I remember there's this quote and it used this idea, it used this word that was kind of strange. I just don't remember where it is or where I put it. You can instantly find those blocks. And then when you click on that, it adds the block reference here, pulls in all of that information from the original source. And in a context where maybe you're re-paraphrasing or paraphrasing in your own words, you even have the ability to replace it with an alias, which means that you can keep the reference itself, and then you would paraphrase it in your own words here. So almost like a footnote, right? You can have it point back to where it came from, and now you can have your own words there replacing it and in the reference.
So yeah, an example, even like I remember I was listening to one pastor and he had the same way of describing repentance every time he used the word repentance. Obviously, it's a core concept in scripture, but like as a pastor, you might talk about it as a U-turn. You might talk about it as a tree growing and fruit bearing. You might talk about it, you have all these different concepts, and then you might have a framework of the 5 steps of repentance. Well, wouldn't it be nice for your people in your church, or even for your own personal like benefit as you think about that concept of repentance, that you have the same description of what repentance is every time you're using it? And that's what you could do. You could have that definition with the illustration included, and then you have that block reference that you're going to use when you're studying something. And then you're consistent in how you're defining it, and you update it over time if necessary and all that kind of stuff.
Again, that's another example, isn't it? Those definitions require refinement. How many times have I used a definition and then after the fact, kindly my wife or a friend or somebody will say, you define that word this way, but I was thinking of this situation where that definition doesn't work, and you realize, oh, wow, I needed to be more careful there, or I needed to add maybe a caveat there. Any kind of definitions involving repentance or forgiveness, there are a lot of theological categories and terms that you need to be careful with, because the line between heresy and orthodoxy is a little bit thin. And again, you don't want to be overstressed about things like this, but it is useful to have a way to update those over time.
Well, we're like, what are we doing as Christian educators and pastors? We are trying to help people understand the Bible and apply it and worship God in where they're at, in the context where they're at.
Yep.
And so it's why Herman Bavinck argued, I didn't read this in Bavinck himself, I heard it on a podcast, but that, Herman Bavinck would say that you need to always have new systematic theologies written for each generation. We need this new, and I think about that at the local level, that you can't just give someone in Kitchener, Ontario this Sunday on August 23rd or whatever, okay, here's this sermon from the Canadian Charter of Christians, blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, you need something for that congregation. And so you have the block reference, you have the definition, but then you have to bring it into your context, and that refinement over time, I think, is necessary. The work of the Holy Spirit even. And that's how it kind of works. It's how it's supposed to work. God doesn't just give us a Bible and say, memorize it. He says, no, sit under the word being preached week after week and discuss it from home to home. Yep. That's contextual with objective authority. It's both and.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And much of what's here, at this point, I'm not teaching every week. So a lot of what's here actually, in my mind, as I think about it, who it's for beyond me, it's for kids that I'm having to talk to and raise and think about ways. How do I talk about truth to them in a way that's at their level, but doesn't miss the mark in terms of the things you're talking about with being accurate and truthful and biblically faithful. And so, having those, one thing I've worked on, it's very early stages, but it's like a family liturgy that I'm working on, where what I would say are like core values and truths that were really impactful for me years ago. How often does that happen, where you come to a season of life where somebody shares something and you've internalized it at this point because it's been 5 years, 10 years, but your kids haven't even hit that bump in the road yet. And so finding a way for me to kind of retrace my steps a little bit, write down what that is, and prepare that for them, where I can hand it to them one day and say, here are some things I thought would be useful for you. And they're done with a very specific audience in mind. That's not a job you do in a month or even a year. That's something you need a tool that will let you do that over many years and keep together all those ideas.
Yeah. And Rome Research is not sponsoring this. They did not pay us. And it does cost money to use Rome Research, unlike other tools that you can use for free. I mean, Evernote, the price there keeps increasing over time to get closer to the higher cost that Rome Research is. But yeah, it's something that I think is a worthwhile investment. I think you want to have intentionality with your thinking, so that your living can be in line with Scripture. So however that looks for you, to be intentional with your thinking, and it doesn't need to use Rome Research, obviously. You don't need to use a computer. You could use pen and paper. You don't even need pen and paper. Like, we're not saying that this is a matter of first importance, but it's just to show this off. Like Tim Challies, he's recommended Rome Research a couple times, and he was the one who pushed me over the edge in my research. I had a couple friends who were like, this is so cool. And one guy, he's using Obsidian now, and sure, use Obsidian. That's great. But that's
the tools are incredible. And this is not about, as you said, not about, pitching just one. I do think that if you could go back in time to some of people before us, believers before us, who thought and wrote and read a lot, and you could show them the power of a tool like this, it would be a no-brainer for them to use this. I remember the story of Jonathan Edwards. He used to go for walks. According to the story I read, I don't know how, I didn't do extensive verification, but he used to take walks and take little scraps of paper. And as he was walking around, he would write down on the paper notes, essentially, and then pin them to his jacket. And then when he came home from his walk, he and his wife would unpin all the notes and then sort them. And so you have this, just think about the how labor intensive that was. And then after you're done, and then you look at his works, Jonathan Edwards' works, he has tons of books that are miscellany type books that are not published in a way that we would think a normal book. They're just literally, they're all of these little ideas and things that he collected over time that are now available through his journals. And if you were to go back to him and say, hey, you know what, you can do that process that you're talking about and save it in a place where you could easily reference them and connect them and update them over time and share them with others instantly. Those benefits are almost impossible for someone before our generation to understand. And I think as long as the tool is being used in a way that would honor and glorify God and be useful to other people, then we should be grateful for them. And that's what I am. It's just grateful.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I think if I tried to steel man an argument against Rome Research, it'd be something along the lines of like, the medium is the message, and by using a digital platform as opposed to written, there's impacts of that, and then you're training yourself on a digital thing rather than physical embodied, which we were made for, to work with our hands. And you can disconnect ideas from people. You can disconnect, even books do this to a degree, when you're kind of going more and more abstract rather than the real personal, day-to-day love. Who is my neighbor? We could sit abstractly writing in Rome Research, who is my neighbor, instead of loving, like the Good Samaritan did. And so that would be like the best I could in a short 1 minute span, the argument against Rome. But at the end of the day, obviously I'm a fan and I use it. And there are trade-offs for sure. Not to mention cost and, the sense of, I should always add, but it's probably one of the most low anxiety note-taking tools because it's a system that organizes itself, as we've demonstrated. No, there's certainly dangers you want to be aware of. Anything like this that you're doing. There's this idea even called the collector's fallacy. I think I had it here at one point, but the idea of just feeling like you're being productive because you're collecting a bunch of stuff from your reading and notes or writing. And at the end of the day, you do have to be connected, as you said, to a real community of believers, to a church, to a family, and to real people, your neighbors. And if something like Rome is just going to make you bury your head in the ground and lose touch with all of that, that would be a problem for sure. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So it's good to add those caveats, but no, thanks so much, Luke. This has been super helpful. As referenced, Luke and I did meet before, like a month ago, and we tried to work through the exact thing that we worked through now. It wasn't as good and polished as this. This was awesome. We definitely, it was definitely beneficial. Maybe God intentionally screwed up the software recording last time. We needed a second try. Yeah. We needed a second try because this was super helpful going through it. I mean, there's a million more things we could discuss, but hopefully this will help some people who are considering it. Maybe we'll do a mini series for WWJT on different note-taking tools or things like that. We'll see. So leave us a comment in the YouTube video comment section of what you found valuable, what you're taking away from this. Always appreciate seeing those comments and seeing people engage in different ways of how they're using it. And feel free to reach out to Luke. You're on Twitter. Anything else you wanted to add, Luke? When are you going to publish your Rome graph into a book? Like you're going to be the next Jonathan Edwards? Is that what you're planning? No, unfortunately not. There actually is a quality of insight required there in order to reach that level. It's not just volume. I don't have any plans to publish anything. I am writing and a few things that may long term be turned into something written. But for right now, I'm just trying to love my family, learn as I go. And this it's been a really pleasure. Just the last thing I would say is just it's been a pleasure now to do this a second time, but to be able to talk with you and be able to share something here along the lines of technology that also definitely overlaps with faith, which has just been a blessing for me to do. So. Yeah. I've been talking with Joel recently about like, what is our podcast about? Like we need to sharpen that definition. And I've said to him, like, our podcast is about a feeling that we love Jesus, we love technology, but there's this feeling that there's this tension, this incongruency, and it's in our gut that when you think about your phone, you think about your laptop, you feel something. When you think about your Lego set that you first built as a kid, you feel something. And so what do we do with those feelings? Our podcast is about right thinking about those feelings for the sake of right living. It's really trying to like, there's something that's off because technology is both created by God and good and cursed. So we need to navigate this tension, think about it well, and ultimately model Jesus, imitate him. What would Jesus take? So anyways, thanks for coming on, Luke. This has been a blast, and I look forward to continuing to learn from you on Twitter, but this was better than Twitter, I would say. That's good. Yeah, it's nice to meet you. Thank you so much for having me on. Thanks, man. Take care. Bye.